There is a moment you've had more times than you can count. You walk into a room. Nothing has happened yet. Nobody has said a word to you. And within 60 seconds, you know. You know who's carrying something heavy. You know who's about to argue with someone. You know who's smiling with their mouth but not with anything else. You know which conversation is going to drain you before it starts. You know. And then you spend the next 3 hours managing all of it. Taking on weight that doesn't belong to you. Carrying home feelings that weren't yours when you arrived. Lying awake at 2 in the morning, processing an emotional residue from other people's lives while they sleep clean and unbothered. And somewhere in the exhaustion, you've asked yourself the same question enough times that it started to feel like a permanent background noise. Why am I like this? Today I'm going to answer that question. Not the spiritual version of the answer. Not the version that tells you you're cosmically chosen or vibrationally special. The real answer. The one that lives in neuroscience and developmental psychology and the specific architecture of what happened to your brain during a very particular kind of childhood. Because here's what nobody tells people who feel everything. This is not a gift you were born with. It is a skill your nervous system built under pressure. And understanding exactly how it was built is the key to understanding why it keeps costing you so much. There are 5 things happening inside you that most people who feel deeply have never had explained to them clearly. 5 mechanisms. And by the time I walk you through all of them, something is going to shift. Not just in how you understand yourself, in how you move through every room you walk into for the rest of your life. Stay with me, because the last one is the one that changes everything. The first mechanism is the one that explains where this started, and it starts earlier than you think. When you were a child, you lived in an environment where the emotional temperature of the room was unpredictable. Maybe one parent's mood determined whether the evening would be safe or volatile. Maybe love was conditional, given when you performed correctly and retracted when you didn't. Maybe nothing was ever said directly, but everything was communicated through silences and tensions and micro-expressions that you learned to read the way other children learned to read picture books. You had no choice but to become a specialist in human emotional states. Not because you were particularly gifted, because you were trying to survive. Your nervous system, which was still forming, which was still deciding what kind of world this was going to be and what kind of person you needed to become to navigate it, received a very clear instruction. Pay attention to people. Track them constantly. Never miss a signal. Because missing a signal has consequences. And so it built machinery for that job. It built it fast. It built it well. And it has been running, largely without your permission, every single day since. This is called hypervigilance. And in the context it was built for, it was a masterpiece of biological adaptation. It kept you safe. It let you anticipate problems before they arrived. It let you soften situations before they escalated. It turned you into the most emotionally intelligent person in almost every room you've ever been in. The problem is that hypervigilance does not know the difference between a home that was dangerous in 1994 and an office, a dinner party, or a first date in the present. It treats every social environment as a potential threat zone. It runs its full protocol on every person you encounter, and then it hands you the bill. The exhaustion you feel after being around people is not weakness. It is the cost of running advanced threat detection software in a context that no longer requires it. You are paying a price that made complete sense once and doesn't anymore. And understanding that distinction is the first crack in the wall. The second mechanism is the one that explains why other people's emotions don't just affect you, they enter you. There is a type of brain cell called a mirror neuron. Its function is to simulate other people's experiences inside your own nervous system. When you watch someone flinch in pain, your mirror neurons fire in a pattern that mimics the pain response. You don't just observe the flinch, something in you flinches with them. This is the biological foundation of empathy. Everyone has mirror neurons. But research on highly sensitive individuals consistently shows that in people with your nervous system profile, the mirror neuron system is significantly more active, more responsive, more porous. When someone near you is in distress, your nervous system doesn't just notice it. It begins to run a simulation of that distress inside your own body. Their anxiety becomes a tightening in your chest. Their grief becomes a weight you didn't have when you walked in. Their unspoken anger becomes a sourness at the back of your throat that you can't explain. You have been calling this empathy. In a technical sense, you're right. But there's a more precise word for what happens at this intensity. It's called somatic resonance. Your body is physically resonating with other people's emotional states the way a tuning fork resonates with a matching frequency. You are not imagining this. You are not being dramatic. You are experiencing a neurological event. Here is the critical piece that most people explaining this get wrong. Somatic resonance is not the same as understanding someone's pain. Understanding is cognitive. Resonance is physical. A therapist can understand their client's grief deeply, professionally, with real compassion, without their own nervous system going into a grief response. That is trained, boundaried empathy. What you are doing is something different. You are not witnessing the emotion, you are hosting it. And there is a profound difference between being a compassionate witness and being an involuntary host. The first is sustainable, the second is not. And right now, you are almost certainly doing far more hosting than you realize. The third mechanism is the one that explains why a specific type of person keeps finding you. It is not random. It is not bad luck. It is not some cosmic test of your patience or your goodness. It is signal and response. Basic behavioral science. Here is what is happening. People who carry large amounts of unprocessed emotional pain, unresolved grief, suppressed rage, chronic anxiety they have never dealt with, are constantly broadcasting that pain outward through their behavior, their body language, the way they occupy space. Most people encounter that broadcast and unconsciously move away from it. Not cruelly, not consciously, just naturally the way you step back from something uncomfortably loud. You do the opposite. Your nervous system, trained from childhood to orient toward emotional distress and manage it, moves toward that signal automatically. You feel the pain in them before they've said anything. And because your entire developmental history has wired you to believe that your job is to help regulate other people's emotional states, you lean in. They feel this, not consciously. But people in pain are extraordinarily good at finding people who will absorb their pain without requiring them to change. And once they find one, they hold on. There are 3 types of people who specifically and repeatedly land in your life. And I want you to recognize them not as villains, but as patterns. Because the moment you can name the pattern, you stop being inside it. The first is the person who was never given a stable emotional foundation as a child, and has been unconsciously searching for a replacement ever since. They come to you with a need so deep and so old that nothing you give them will ever be enough. Not because you're insufficient, but because what they're looking for doesn't exist in another adult. It only ever existed in a childhood that didn't happen. You feel their pain acutely. You keep trying to fill something that has no bottom. And you exhaust yourself in the attempt while they remain, underneath all the gratitude, unchanged. The second is the person who has spent years refusing to look at the parts of themselves they find most shameful. Their anger, their jealousy, their cruelty, their failure. Because they won't carry it themselves, they put it somewhere. That somewhere is you. They don't do this consciously, but when they leave your presence feeling inexplicably lighter and you feel inexplicably heavier, that transfer has occurred. You have been used as a psychological disposal site for emotions they couldn't face. The third is the most deliberately exhausting. This is the person who has discovered, through years of practice, that the fastest way to feel alive is to generate drama in someone else and feed off the response. They are not in genuine crisis when they call you at midnight. They are stimulating a reaction. Your worry, your scrambling, your desperate attempts to help, that is the resource they are extracting. And they have identified you as someone who produces it reliably. Recognizing these patterns does not mean these people are evil. It means they are stuck. And here is the most important thing I can tell you about people who are stuck. You cannot carry someone to a destination they have not chosen to walk to. Trying costs you everything and moves them nowhere. The fourth mechanism is the one nobody wants to talk about because it involves an uncomfortable truth about you. Some of what keeps you in these dynamics is not just your nervous system. It is a belief so old and so embedded that it doesn't feel like a belief anymore. It feels like reality. The belief is this: your value is located in your usefulness to other people. This is not a character flaw. This is a logical conclusion drawn from a specific kind of childhood. When love in your early environment was conditional, when approval was given for performing, for being helpful, for managing other people's emotional states, your developing mind did what all developing minds do. It found the rule. And the rule it found was, when I am useful, I am safe. When I am needed, I belong. When I am fixing something, I have a right to be here. That rule was never spoken out loud, but it has been running your decisions about relationships ever since. This is why you feel a specific, almost physical guilt when you say no. Why declining to help someone who is struggling feels not just unkind but somehow wrong, like you are violating something fundamental about who you are. Why you can identify other people's emotional needs from across a room, but often cannot tell someone what you actually need without feeling like you're asking for too much. It is also why the people who drain you can drain you so completely. Because the transaction feels on some deep level like it's supposed to feel this way, like this is what you're for. Here is what is actually true, and I need you to sit with this. Your worth is not a service you provide. It is not a function. It is not contingent on how well you regulate other people's emotional states or how available you are for their pain. You are not a mechanism. You are a person. And the version of you that exists separate from what you do for others is not just valid, it is the entire point. The belief that your value is located in your usefulness is the open door that every draining person in your life has walked through. Closing that door does not make you cold, it makes you whole. And wholeness is the only thing that will ever actually break the pattern. When you were a child, you lived inside an emotional environment that was unstable in some fundamental way. I'm not necessarily talking about dramatic abuse or visible crisis, though for some of you that's exactly what it was. I'm talking about something that can be far more subtle and far harder to name. An environment where the emotional temperature of the room shifted without warning, where one person's mood determined whether a night was going to be safe or volatile, where love was present but conditional, given warmly when you performed correctly, withdrawn without explanation when you didn't. Where things were communicated not through words but through silences, through the specific quality of a sigh, through the way a door closed, through the tightening in someone's jaw that you learned to read before you had language for what you were reading. In that environment, you faced a problem that no child should have to solve. The adults who were supposed to provide safety were also the source of unpredictability. You couldn't just relax and exist. You had to monitor, constantly, because missing a signal had consequences. Not necessarily dramatic, catastrophic consequences, sometimes just the quiet withdrawal of warmth, the subtle shift into disappointment, the feeling of having done something wrong without knowing what. But to a child's nervous system, which is entirely dependent on the emotional availability of caregivers, those consequences registered as genuine threat. And so your nervous system did exactly what nervous systems are designed to do under threat. It adapted. It built machinery for the job it was being asked to do. It developed an extraordinary capacity to read emotional states from minimal information. The micro-expression that crossed a face for less than a quarter of a second. The specific way a voice changed when tension was building underneath the surface calm. The difference between a silence that was comfortable and a silence that was loaded. Your system learned to process all of this with a speed and accuracy that most trained professionals spend years trying to develop. You didn't develop it through training, you developed it through necessity. And you developed it young, which means it didn't just become a skill, it became part of the architecture of how your brain works. Not a tool you pick up when needed, a default operating mode that runs whether you want it to or not. This is called hypervigilance, and in the environment it was forged in, it was a masterpiece of biological adaptation. It kept you safe. It let you anticipate emotional weather before it arrived. It lets you adjust, accommodate, deflect, smooth, and soften situations before they became dangerous. It turned you into the most emotionally perceptive person in almost every room you have ever occupied. But here's the thing about adaptations. They are built for the environment that created them. And when the environment changes, the adaptation doesn't automatically update. Your nervous system built hypervigilance for a specific set of conditions that existed in a specific place during a specific period of your life. It does not know that those conditions no longer define your reality. It cannot tell the difference between the home that was unpredictable in your childhood and the office you walk into on a Tuesday morning. It runs the same protocol. On everyone. In every context. At full intensity. The exhaustion you carry after being around people is not a personality quirk. It is not sensitivity in some vague, undefined sense. It is the documented physiological cost of running advanced threat detection software in a context that no longer requires it at that intensity. You are expending genuine neurological resources on a job that nobody is asking you to do anymore. And you have been doing it so long, so automatically, that you stop noticing it as effort. It just feels like being you. Understanding this is the first crack in the wall, not because it fixes anything immediately, but because it relocates the explanation. This did not happen to you because of who you fundamentally are. It happened to you because of what your environment required. And anything that was built can, with the right understanding, be rebuilt differently. The second mechanism is the one that explains why other people's emotions don't just affect you. They don't just brush against you. They enter you. They take up residence. And they are sometimes genuinely difficult to distinguish from your own. There is a type of brain cell called a mirror neuron. Its basic function is to simulate, inside your own nervous system, the experiences you observe in others. When you watch someone flinch from pain, a network of mirror neurons fires in a pattern that partially mimics your own pain response. You don't just intellectually register that the other person is in pain. Something in your own system echoes it. This is the neurological foundation of empathy. This is why humans can feel moved by a story about a stranger, why a piece of music can produce grief in someone who has nothing to grieve, why witnessing joy can produce a real, physical warmth that doesn't belong to your own circumstances. Everyone has this system, but research on highly sensitive individuals, and the sensitivity profile you carry is well documented in the clinical literature, consistently shows that in people like you, the mirror neuron system is significantly more active, more responsive, and crucially, more porous, less filtered. The simulation your nervous system runs of other people's emotional states is more complete, more physical, more immersive than what most people experience. The fifth mechanism is the one that changes how you walk into every room from this point forward. Most of the guidance available to people who feel deeply focuses on protection, shields, walls, techniques for keeping other people's energy out. And some of that is useful, but it is incomplete, because protection built on fear is still a trauma response. It is still your nervous system in defensive mode. It is still you organized around other people, just in a different direction. What I want to offer you is something different. It is a shift from protection to presence. Here is what that means. When you walk into a room and your nervous system begins its automatic scan, instead of bracing, instead of absorbing, instead of beginning the unconscious process of managing what you're picking up, you do one thing first. You locate yourself. Not your awareness of the room, not your reading of other people, you, your own breath, your own feet on the floor, the specific physical sensation of being inside your own body rather than extending outward into everyone else's. This sounds simple. It is not simple for you, because your entire nervous system has been oriented outward since you were a child. Coming back inside yourself, making yourself the first reference point rather than the last, goes against a habit that is decades old. But it is learnable, and it is the single most significant shift available to you. When you are grounded inside yourself first, something changes in how you process the emotional environment around you. You still feel it. The sensitivity does not go away. You are not trying to become numb. But there is now a you that is separate from what you're feeling. A witness. A ground. Something that can observe what's happening in the room without becoming it. This is the difference between a doctor who feels genuine compassion for a patient and remains clear-headed enough to help them, and someone who becomes so overwhelmed by the patient's pain that they can't think. Both people care. Only one of them is useful, and only one of them goes home intact. Compassion that costs you your own personhood is not sustainable compassion. It is self-erasure with a generous name. When you learn to locate yourself first, you stop being a sponge and start being a witness. And witnesses can do something sponges cannot. They can make a choice. They can feel the pull of someone's pain and consciously decide how much of themselves to offer and under what terms and with what limits. Not because they care less, because they have finally accepted that they matter too. There is something that happens when a person who has felt everything their entire life finally starts to feel themselves. The exhaustion doesn't disappear immediately. The patterns don't reverse overnight. The people who have been drawing from you will not simply drift away without some discomfort. When you stop being as available as you used to be, some people will experience that as a loss. Some will experience it as a betrayal. And because your nervous system has been conditioned to treat other people's discomfort as your responsibility, their reaction will feel like evidence that you've done something wrong. You haven't. You have simply stopped offering a service that was never actually yours to provide. The relationships that survive this shift, the ones that recalibrate and find a new equilibrium, those are your real ones. The ones that only existed because you were absorbing what the other person couldn't carry, those dissolve. Not because you failed them, because the dynamic that held them together was never a relationship. It was a transaction, and you were always the only one paying. What fills the space is different from what was there before. Quieter at first, less dramatic. You may mistake the absence of crisis for the absence of connection. It isn't. It is simply what connection feels like when it is not operating as a rescue mission. You will find that you can be in a room full of people and come home to yourself. That you can hear someone's pain, really hear it, offer something genuine, and then let them carry what is theirs to carry. That your nervous system can be sophisticated and sensitive and extraordinarily tuned without being perpetually on fire. You were not built wrong. You were built for a specific environment that no longer exists. And the extraordinary machinery your nervous system assembled to survive that environment, the emotional precision, the reading of rooms, the ability to sense what is unspoken, none of that has to be dismantled. It just has to be redirected. Not outward by default. Inward first. Always inward first. You spent years feeling everything for everyone else. You know the full landscape of human emotional experience more intimately than most people ever will. You have carried weight that would have broken people who never developed your capacity. Now it is time to use all of that for you. Not instead of others, not in isolation, not by becoming someone who doesn't feel, but as the foundation, as the ground you stand on before you extend yourself anywhere else. The quiet alarm inside you that has always known what everyone else was feeling, it has always known what you were feeling too. You just stopped listening to that part. You were too busy managing the room. The room will be fine. Come home.